No one noticed the woman at the end of the hallway. That was the story of Evelyn Carter's life, being present yet unseen. The law offices of Hawthorne and Blake overlooked downtown Seattle, Washington, all glass walls and muted colors meant to intimidate people into obedience. The rain outside streaked the windows, blurring the skyline into something cold and distant, not crying, not shaking, just quiet. Across from her sat Nathaniel Cross, founder and CEO of Cross Maritime Logistics, a man the business magazines called visionary and ruthless in the same sentence. His suit was tailored to perfection. His posture was relaxed. This was not a loss for him. It was a cleanup. Next to him, his attorney whispered final instructions. On Nathaniel's other side sat Lauren Hale, officially his executive liaison, unofficially the reason this meeting existed at all. She didn't look at Evelyn directly. She didn't need to. Her victory was already assumed. Evelyn stared at the papers, 37 pages, 5 years of marriage reduced to ink and clauses. The room smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and money. "Let's be clear," Nathaniel said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, almost bored. "This doesn't have to be difficult." Evelyn didn't respond. The attorney slid the document closer. "Mrs. Cross, Miss Carter," he corrected smoothly. "This agreement waives all claims to property, equity, and future earnings. In exchange, Mr. Cross is offering a one-time settlement of $40,000. Lauren shifted in her chair, checking her phone. 40,000. That was what 5 years of Evelyn's life was worth. 5 years of relocating cities on a moment's notice. 5 years of hosting investors while pretending not to hear whispered jokes. 5 years of standing behind Nathaniel at galas, introductions always stopping at "my wife," never her name. Evelyn picked up the pen. Nathaniel watched closely. There it was, the moment people always broke. Tears, negotiations, begging, but none came. "You don't want a lawyer of your own?" he asked, almost amused. Evelyn finally looked up. Her eyes were tired but clear. "No," she said softly. "I'm done fighting." That surprised him. The attorney hesitated. "Miss Carter, I must inform you, once signed, this is irreversible." She nodded. "I understand." Lauren glanced up now, her lips tightening. Something about Evelyn's calm made her uneasy. Nathaniel leaned back. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Life isn't cheap. Seattle certainly isn't." Evelyn thought of the nights she'd slept alone while Nathaniel flew private to Monaco. The dinners she cooked for herself in penthouses that never felt like home. The silence that came long before the divorce. The pen touched paper. Her signature was neat, controlled, Evelyn Marie Carter. The sound of the pen moving was the loudest thing in the room. When she finished, she slid the papers back. Nathaniel blinked. That wasn't supposed to happen. The attorney stamped the document. "The divorce is finalized as of today." Just like that, 5 years ended without applause. Nathaniel stood, straightening his cufflinks. "You were good to me once," he said. "But you were never built for my world." Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's where you're wrong." He didn't notice. Lauren rose beside him, already planning the press release, the new chapter, the upgrade. Evelyn remained seated for a moment after the door closed. The attorney gathered his files, curious now. "If you don't mind me asking, why walk away so easily?" Evelyn stood, slipping on her coat. "Because closure doesn't always look like revenge," she said. "Sometimes it looks like silence." She stepped into the hallway. No cameras, no drama, no tears, just a woman walking away with nothing, or so everyone believed. 3 hours later at Boeing Field, private air traffic was halted unexpectedly. Controllers whispered about a priority arrival. A jet descended through the gray clouds, sleek, unfamiliar, unmistakably elite. A Gulfstream G700 touched down, its engines humming with quiet authority. Ground crew froze. This wasn't Cross Maritime money. This was something else. The stairs lowered, and the woman who stepped out wasn't wearing gray anymore. Evelyn Carter had just arrived, and Seattle was about to realize they had misjudged her entirely. The rain had stopped by the time the jet's wheels locked onto the runway. At Boeing Field, the air was sharp and metallic, smelling of fuel and wet concrete. Ground crew moved fast, too fast, for a jet that hadn't been scheduled under any familiar corporate registry. The logo on the tail wasn't a company name. a thin silver line crossing a black circle. Whispers spread quietly. "Who is that?" The door opened. A man stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, scanning the perimeter with trained eyes. Then another. Security, but not flashy. Controlled, precise. No cardigan, no slouched shoulders, no careful smallness. She wore a deep navy coat tailored to her frame, her hair pulled back cleanly, her posture effortless. The wind tugged at the fabric, but she didn't adjust it. She didn't need to. She paused at the top of the stairs, not to admire the view, but to orient herself. Ownership had a posture, and she had learned it young. A black SUV rolled forward. The door opened before her foot touched the ground. Inside the vehicle, the silence felt different from the one she'd lived in for years. This one wasn't lonely. It was intentional. She removed her gloves and reached into her bag, not for a phone, but for a slim tablet secured with biometric access. A message waited. Board confirmed. Acquisition complete. Cross Maritime. Controlling interest secured. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, not in triumph, in grief. Because some part of her had hoped Nathaniel would have been different, that love might have softened ambition, that loyalty would have mattered. It hadn't, and that hurt more than betrayal. Across town, Nathaniel Cross stood in his penthouse, staring at the city he believed he owned. Lauren lounged on the couch, scrolling through social media. "The blogs are already spinning the divorce," she said casually. "They're calling you clean about it. No scandal, no drama." Nathaniel poured himself a drink. "Good. That's how it should be." Lauren smirked. She didn't even cry. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Where is she now?" Lauren asked. "Probably in a studio apartment wondering how to pay rent," he replied too quickly. His phone buzzed. Urgent board meeting requested. Immediate attendance required that was unusual. He frowned. "That's strange." Lauren looked up. "Problem?" "No," he said, forcing confidence. "Probably final prep for the San Diego expansion." But something tightened in his chest. Inside, a private elevator opened directly into a boardroom already occupied. 8 people stood. Not executives, principals, old money, infrastructure, shipping lanes, rail contracts, defense logistics. They didn't clap, they acknowledged. "Miss Carter," said a gray-haired woman at the head of the table, "you took longer than expected." Evelyn removed her coat. "I needed to be sure." The woman nodded. "You always were." A man slid a folder across the table. Cross Maritime's leverage collapsed faster than predicted. Your timing was surgical. Evelyn didn't open the folder. "Was he cruel?" another voice asked. Evelyn hesitated. "No," she said. "He was careless. That's worse." Silence settled. The gray-haired woman leaned forward. "You understand what happens next?" "Yes. You will be seen now." Evelyn exhaled slowly. For 5 years she had hidden, shrunk, tested love without armor. "Good," the woman said. "The conference in San Diego begins tomorrow. Nathaniel Cross will be there. He won't hear it from me." "What's going on?" he demanded. No one answered immediately. Then his CFO spoke. "We've identified a controlling acquisition of company shares, routed through 3 holding firms." Nathaniel laughed once. "That's impossible." The CFO swallowed. "The final authority traces back to a private trust." The CFO slid a document across the table. Nathaniel read the name, and for the first time in his life his hands trembled. His phone buzzed again. A news alert. Mystery investor to arrive in San Diego via private Gulfstream. A photo accompanied the article. Not clear. But the posture was unmistakable. Nathaniel sank into his chair. Somewhere between disbelief and dread, one thought surfaced. He hadn't divorced a nobody. He had set her free. This made his mouth go dry. The boardroom felt smaller now. The glass walls that once showcased Seattle's skyline suddenly felt like a cage. He loosened his tie, then tightened it again, a nervous habit he thought he'd outgrown. "Carter Holdings," he said slowly, as if mispronouncing the name might make it disappear. "That trust has been dormant for years." The CFO nodded. "That's what everyone believed." "And now," Nathaniel snapped. "And now it owns 42% of Cross Maritime," she said. "Effective this morning." A low murmur rippled through the room. Nathaniel's mind raced. Carter Holdings wasn't just old money, it was quiet money. Infrastructure money, the kind that didn't chase headlines, only leverage. "Who authorized this?" he demanded. The general counsel cleared his throat. "You signed the vulnerability clause last year, during the refinance." Nathaniel remembered it then. A late night, a rushed signature. Evelyn had been sitting across the table, reading silently. She'd asked one question. "Are you sure?" He'd laughed and told her not to worry about things she didn't understand. The memory burned. Across the country, Evelyn Carter stood alone in a hotel room overlooking San Diego Bay. The water glimmered under the evening lights. Boats moved slowly, like thoughts she refused to chase. Her assistant, Marianne Holt, knocked softly. "Your schedule is confirmed. Press breakfast at 7. Closed-door session with the Infrastructure Council at 9. The keynote—" "I won't be doing the keynote," Evelyn said quietly. Marianne paused. "They specifically requested you." "I know," Evelyn replied, "but I don't want the story to be about me walking onto a stage." She turned from the window. "I want it to be about him realizing the stage isn't his anymore." Marianne smiled, a little nervously. "Cold, no," Evelyn said. "Clean." When the door closed, Evelyn finally allowed herself to sit. Her hands shook, not from fear, from memory. The nights she'd stayed awake while Nathaniel paced, panicking over debt ratios. The way he'd dismissed her suggestions, then repeated them weeks later as his own. The loneliness of being married to a man who only loved momentum. She hadn't planned revenge. She had planned distance. Power had followed her anyway. The next morning, the Pacific Crest Economic Forum buzzed with energy. Private jets lined the runway. CEOs, senators, foreign investors, everyone was there to be seen and to see who mattered. Nathaniel arrived early, his smile practiced, his nerves hidden behind a tailored suit. Lauren trailed behind him, sunglasses on, whispering, "Why is everyone staring?" "They're not," he said sharply. "But they were." Whispers followed him like static. "Did you hear? Cross is exposed. Carter Holdings, look it up, welcome. Carter Holdings, strategic partner, not investor." Partner meant control. Lauren tugged his sleeve. "Nate, what's going on?" Inside the main hall, the lights dimmed slightly, not for an announcement, but for arrival. She wore a simple ivory suit, no jewelry except a thin watch. Her hair was pulled back, her face composed, but her eyes were alive in a way they hadn't been for years. Time fractured. This wasn't the woman who'd folded laundry while he took calls. This wasn't the woman who'd apologized when he forgot anniversaries. This was someone else, someone complete. Lauren leaned close. "Why does everyone know her?" Nathaniel swallowed. "Because," he said quietly, "they always did." Evelyn didn't look at him. She greeted governors. She shook hands with investors. She laughed, once, genuinely. And with every step she took, Nathaniel felt something slipping. Not money. Control. A man approached Evelyn, extending his hand. "Miss Carter, I'm Robert Hale, chair of the council. We're honored." "Thank you," she replied. "I'm glad we could finally speak openly." The word finally landed like a blade. Nathaniel moved before he could stop himself. "Evelyn," she turned, and for the first time since the divorce, she looked directly at him. Not angry, not sad, curious. "Yes, Mr. Cross?" she asked politely. The formality hurt more than silence ever had. "We need to talk," he said. She considered him for a moment, then glanced at her watch. "You can have 5 minutes," she said. "After that, I have a meeting about your shipping routes." She stepped past him. Nathaniel stood frozen. 5 minutes. That was all the man who once owned her time was worth now. Nathaniel followed Evelyn into a quieter corridor lined with abstract art and soft lighting, the noise of the summit fading behind them like a door closing on his old life. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He noticed small details he'd never bothered to see before, the calm way she breathed, the stillness in her shoulders, the absence of that nervous habit she once had of twisting her ring. It struck him then that she wasn't performing confidence. She owned it. "You look well," he finally said, the words sounding inadequate the moment they left his mouth. "So do you," Evelyn replied evenly, though her eyes didn't linger. "Successful, as always." "That's not fair," he said, frustration leaking through. "You didn't tell me." "Not about any of this." She let out a slow breath, not angry, just tired. You never asked. You never wanted to know who I was before you decided who I should be. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair. You let me believe you had nothing. I had peace, she said quietly. I traded it for love. That was my mistake. The words hit him harder than any accusation. For years, he'd mistaken her silence for weakness, her loyalty for dependency. Now, standing here, he realized how wrong he'd been. She hadn't stayed because she needed him. She had stayed because she chose him. And he had never chosen her back. This acquisition, he said carefully, lowering his voice. It feels personal. Evelyn finally looked directly at him, her gaze steady, unreadable. It isn't revenge, Nathaniel. Revenge is emotional. This is business. You taught me that. A door opened behind them, and voices drifted closer. Time was slipping away. You're dismantling everything I built, he said, a crack forming in his composure. She shook her head. No, I'm stabilizing it. Cross Maritime was bleeding under expansion you couldn't sustain. I'm keeping it alive, just not under your control. His chest tightened. So that's it? You walk in, take my company, and disappear again? Evelyn stepped closer, close enough that he could hear the certainty in her voice. I disappeared once to see if you would notice. You didn't. This time, I'm very visible. Her phone vibrated softly. She glanced at it, then took a step back. Your 5 minutes are over. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I truly hoped you'd be kinder than this. Nathaniel watched her walk away, surrounded almost immediately by people who deferred to her presence. In that moment, surrounded by wealth and influence, he felt something unfamiliar and terrifying, irrelevance. The woman he had dismissed had not only survived without him, she had outgrown the world he ruled. And the summit had only just begun. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the keynote resumed. But Nathaniel barely heard a word. His attention remained fixed on Evelyn, now seated at the center table reserved for principal investors, flanked by executives who once waited outside his office for hours. Every nod she gave, every quiet instruction, carried authority that needed no announcement. She had become gravity itself, pulling power toward her without effort. He remembered the nights she had sat across from him at the dining table, papers neatly stacked, waiting for him to look up. He never had. Back then, silence had been her language of survival. Now, it was his punishment. When the acquisition vote was called, the room filled with polite applause. Nathaniel felt it like a verdict being read aloud. Cross Maritime Holdings, his empire, his legacy, was now under provisional control of a consortium led by Evelyn Carter Holdings. Her name echoed on the screen in bold lettering, clean and undeniable. No anger rose in him, no urge to protest. Only a hollow realization that power lost quietly is the most devastating kind. During the recess, old allies approached him with rehearsed sympathy. Handshakes lingered too long, voices softened artificially. They spoke as if he were already a chapter closing. Nathaniel nodded, smiled when required, and excused himself. He stepped outside onto the terrace where the city stretched endlessly below, glittering and indifferent. For the first time in years, success no longer felt like armor. Behind him, the door opened. I thought you might be here, Evelyn said. He didn't turn immediately. You always knew where to find me. That was when you wanted to be found, she replied. He faced her then, and the distance between them felt wider than ever, despite the few feet of marble separating them. Did it ever matter to you? He asked quietly. Us? Her expression softened, not with longing, but with honesty. It mattered enough that I stayed longer than I should have. The truth of that settled between them, heavy and final. Nathaniel swallowed. If I had listened, if I had been different. She raised a hand gently, stopping him. Regret doesn't rewrite history. It only teaches the future. A breeze lifted her hair slightly, and for a brief second, she looked like the woman he had once loved, before life sharpened her, before neglect taught her strength. Then the moment passed. I didn't come to hurt you, she said, but I won't protect you from the consequences of who you chose to be. She turned to leave but paused once more. Take some time away, Nathaniel. Power isn't the same as purpose. You confuse the two. As she disappeared back into the light, Nathaniel remained still, the city humming below him. For the first time in his life, there were no meetings waiting, no decisions demanding his authority. Only silence, and the weight of understanding that some losses are not meant to be recovered. And somewhere deep within that silence, something fragile stirred, not hope, but change. Nathaniel Sterling left the city before dawn. No press release announced his departure. No farewell dinners were arranged. The private driver waited in silence as the car rolled through streets that had once bent to his will. Towers bearing his name faded into the rearview mirror, their glass faces reflecting a man he barely recognized anymore. For the first time since his 20s, Nathaniel was moving without a destination dictated by power. The lake house in Vermont had been an afterthought purchase years ago, a tax decision, nothing more. Now it became refuge. The air there was colder, cleaner, unbothered by ambition. He spent the first days doing nothing of importance. No calls, no deals. Just long walks along the water, the sound of leaves underfoot, the uncomfortable company of his own thoughts. At night, memories came uninvited. Evelyn at 30, standing in the kitchen with rolled-up sleeves explaining a risk assessment he had dismissed without reading. Evelyn at 40, watching him from across a crowded room, already understanding that she had outgrown the space he confined her to. He had mistaken her patience for dependence. That, more than any business error, had been his fatal miscalculation. Back in the city, Evelyn moved forward without hesitation. The provisional control turned permanent within weeks. Under her leadership, Cross Maritime was restructured, not dismantled. Where Nathaniel had ruled through intimidation and silence, Evelyn led through precision. She listened, she delegated, she cut only what was rotten, preserving what still had purpose. Markets responded. Investors followed. Confidence stabilized, not out of fear but trust. Boardrooms that once echoed with Nathaniel's voice now carried hers, calm, measured, unshakable. Yet success did not intoxicate her. Late nights found her alone in her office, city lights flickering beyond the glass. She kept one drawer locked, untouched. Inside were old notes, drafts, handwritten margins from years spent building an empire she had not been allowed to name as hers. She never opened it. Closure, she knew, was not about revisiting wounds. It was about no longer bleeding. Nathaniel returned thinner, quieter. When he finally accepted an invitation to a small industry forum far from the spotlight, it felt like stepping into a foreign language. People spoke differently now. Less bravado, more substance. He listened more than he spoke, and for the first time realized how rarely he had truly listened before. A young founder approached him afterward, nervous but sincere. "I studied your early career," the man said, "before Cross became what it was. You built something meaningful once." The words struck deeper than criticism ever had. That night, alone in a modest hotel room, Nathaniel stared at his reflection and understood something simple and devastating. Empires don't collapse overnight. They erode when the builder forgets why he started. Across the country, Evelyn signed the final documents that made her leadership undeniable. No champagne followed. No victory speech. Just a quiet exhale as she closed the folder and stood by the window. She had not destroyed Nathaniel Sterling. She had simply stepped out of his shadow, and in doing so, forced him to face his own. Boston in late spring carried a fragile kind of warmth, softening the edges of stone and steel. Evelyn walked briskly along the Charles River, her heels clicking against the pavement, earbuds in, but music muted beneath her thoughts. She had agreed to attend a private finance symposium, just a panel discussion, nothing more. Yet beneath her calm exterior, anticipation coiled like a spring she refused to release. Nathaniel Sterling entered the same venue, a man changed in ways the world could not immediately measure. His suit was understated, navy instead of his usual black, a small signal of humility, or perhaps concession. He moved carefully through the crowd, hands in pockets, nodding at acquaintances without the old arrogance. He sensed her presence before he saw her, a pulse of familiarity threading through his chest. Evelyn spotted him first. He hadn't noticed yet, head bowed as he reviewed his notes. Her breath caught, not with anger nor longing, but with the precise recognition of a rival who had once been intimate, now transformed. The years had tempered him, revealed cracks that no money could conceal. When their eyes met, the room shrank. Nothing was said at first, only acknowledgement. No bitterness, no faux cordiality. Just recognition, like two chess masters silently gauging the next move. Nathaniel stepped forward, hesitant. "Evelyn," he said, voice low, almost a question. "Mr. Sterling," she replied evenly, her tone careful, measured, a single syllable that carried the weight of 5 years. She studied him, not as the man who had dismissed her, but as someone who had once been indispensable to her growth, now obsolete in her empire. A moderator called the panel to order, and they parted without another word. Yet the brief exchange left the air between them electric. Each carried the memory of past mistakes, regrets unsaid, and lessons painfully learned. Each knew this encounter would not be the last. After the panel, Evelyn moved toward the networking lounge, her assistant in tow. Nathaniel lingered, watching from a distance as she engaged with industry leaders. Something in her posture, firm, graceful, unconquerable, reminded him of what he had lost before he fully understood its value. Later, a private moment in the hall allowed him to approach. "You've done well," he admitted quietly, almost too quietly to be heard above the hum of conversation. Evelyn turned, regarding him with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Thank you," she said. "And you?" "I'm learning," he confessed, a rare truth that tasted of humility. She smiled faintly, the kind that held history and caution in equal measure. "Learning is good," she said. "For some of us, it's the only way forward." For a brief instant, the ghosts of their shared past seemed to lift, not completely, but enough to allow them to stand on neutral ground. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes that was the first step toward a future neither had dared imagine. As the evening lights of Boston reflected on the river, Evelyn and Nathaniel walked separate paths again, but the invisible thread between them had been rewoven, stronger, tauter, and full of possibility. The skyline of Chicago stretched like steel and glass into a bruised sunset as Evelyn stepped into the lobby of the Marquette Tower. Her reflection in the mirrored walls caught her attention, a woman poised, confident, but with eyes that carried both vigilance and the faintest hint of fatigue. 5 years of planning, maneuvering, and silent endurance had led to this night, the first board meeting since her acquisition of Sterling Dynamics' largest shareholder stake. Inside the conference room, the air was cold, conditioned to corporate precision. The board members shuffled papers, tapped screens, and whispered behind polished mahogany. Evelyn's presence was magnetic, heads turned almost involuntarily. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, minimalist jewelry, and a calm expression that disguised the storm inside. Nathaniel Sterling arrived late. He paused at the door, surveying the room like a general entering a battlefield. For a moment his eyes met hers across the polished table, and the room seemed to shrink around them. Neither spoke, yet every subtle glance, every twitch of an eyebrow, carried unspoken challenges. The meeting began. Discussions of acquisitions, projections, and merger clauses filled the air. Evelyn listened carefully, making occasional interjections that were polite but decisive. When a board member questioned the practicality of integrating certain tech subsidiaries, Evelyn leaned forward, her voice calm yet cutting. "The integration isn't optional, it's inevitable, and the company that executes it fastest wins. We either adapt or we fall behind." A murmur of agreement ran around the room, but Nathaniel's lips tightened. He had underestimated her, again. Once he had held every card, every advantage. Now she held leverage he couldn't yet fully measure. Then came the twist no one expected. An anonymous email appeared on the company's secure server, addressed to all board members. Its subject line read, "Sterling Dynamics. Hidden liabilities exposed." Screens flickered as spreadsheets, documents, and confidential emails revealed years of concealed mismanagement. Decisions Nathaniel had taken in his pursuit of profit that now threatened to derail the entire merger. Gasps filled the room, fingers pointed. Accusations flew in hushed tones. Nathaniel's face paled, the mask of control cracking for the first time in public view. Evelyn, however, remained composed, tapping lightly on her tablet. She had anticipated such a contingency, had arranged the timing meticulously, and now held the upper hand not just financially but morally. "Gentlemen," Evelyn's voice rang clear, cutting through the tension. We can address these issues quietly, or we can address them publicly. The choice will determine the future of this company, and the legacy each of you leaves behind. Nathaniel felt a cold surge of recognition. This was not the meek, silent woman he had dismissed years ago. This was a force reshaped by loss, strategy, and quiet vengeance. And worse, she wasn't targeting him personally, yet every move she made reminded him painfully of the mistakes he had made in underestimating her. The board murmured again, looking between Nathaniel and Evelyn. The room was divided, some leaning toward loyalty to the former CEO, others toward the woman whose foresight had just averted a looming corporate disaster. Evelyn's calm intensity was like gravity, pulling alliances, shifting loyalties, and bending the narrative to her favor without a single shout. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, silently acknowledging a truth he had never admitted aloud. The game had changed, and Evelyn was no longer a player he could control. She was the one writing the rules now. As the meeting adjourned, Evelyn walked slowly through the polished hallways of Marquette Tower, her heels echoing softly against the marble floors. Each step was deliberate, measured, her mind already leaping several moves ahead. Behind the veneer of calm, her heart still thudded with adrenaline. Nathaniel's shock had been satisfying, but the night was far from over. Her phone buzzed. A secure notification lit the screen. Phase 2, activation complete. Meet at the usual location. She typed a single word, acknowledged. The message was brief, sterile, but it carried the weight of years of preparation, years of silent planning that no one had suspected. Outside, the Chicago streets were cloaked in rain. The city lights shimmered in the puddles, reflecting a world that was always in motion, always unpredictable. Evelyn stepped into her matte black SUV, where her assistant, Chloe, handed her a folder. The contents were sensitive, confidential investment documents, new contracts, and evidence she had quietly gathered over the past month. Among them, a single file bore the emblem of a foreign investment consortium, one with deep pockets, no patience for Nathaniel's arrogance, and no tolerance for failure. She recalled her nights alone in the Sterling apartment after the divorce, watching Nathaniel boast at galas, see the world through lenses of wealth and power, while she counted invisible losses in her own heart. Every insult, every subtle dismissal had been a lesson. Every quiet moment of humiliation had been an opportunity in disguise. And now, she wasn't just walking into power, she was owning it. The SUV pulled into a private garage beneath an unassuming office building on Michigan Avenue. Chloe unlocked a separate underground elevator. The doors opened into a dimly lit boardroom where a man in his early 50s waited, tall and unyielding. His presence radiated authority, and his sharp gray eyes studied her as if he were measuring the weight of her soul. "Evelyn Carter," he said, his voice smooth, layered with a quiet power. "I've been expecting you. The assets are ready for transfer. Are you certain you're prepared for what comes next?" "I've been ready my entire life," she replied. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I didn't just survive the marriage, James. I planned every step, every moment. Every reaction was intentional. And now it's time to see the real world recognize it." He nodded, sliding a glass of water toward her, but his eyes never left hers. Few people can turn pain into leverage. Fewer still can wield it without letting emotion cloud their judgment. You, Ms. Carter, are one of the rare ones. Tonight, you become untouchable. She opened the folder, scanning the documents one more time. Nathaniel's face flashed in her mind, arrogant, dismissive, oblivious. For years he had believed she was powerless. Now he would see the opposite. Not through drama, not through confrontation, but through influence, strategy, and timing. James leaned back, letting the gravity of the moment settle in the room. "The final piece," he said, placing a sealed envelope on the table. "This contains the stock options and transfer rights. Sign this, and from this moment on, you hold the majority voice in Sterling Dynamics. Your influence can redirect the merger. Your decisions will sway markets, and your name will be the one that people fear, respect, and ultimately obey." Evelyn's fingers hovered over the pen. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of history, the burden of expectation, and the intoxicating thrill of vindication. Then she signed. The echo of the pen on the paper sounded like a gavel in a courtroom. Final, irrevocable, and terrifying to those who had underestimated her. James looked at her, a faint smile breaking his otherwise impassive face. Welcome to the league of those who write their own destiny. Outside, the rain had stopped. Chicago sparkled in the night like a jewel, beautiful, dangerous, and full of opportunity. Evelyn stepped back into the SUV, her mind already racing ahead to the next stage. Nathaniel Sterling thought he was untouchable, but he hadn't seen anything yet. The real game had only just begun. That evening, the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton was bathed in golden light. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling glow over the assembled crowd of Chicago's most influential figures: bankers, investors, media moguls, and politicians. Everyone had gathered for the annual Sterling Dynamics Gala, a night Nathaniel Sterling assumed would be his triumph, his carefully curated showcase of wealth and influence. Nathaniel had arrived early, wearing his signature navy suit tailored to perfection. His hair gleamed under the lights, his cufflinks catching the attention of anyone who dared to glance at him. Isabella, his assistant and de facto social chameleon, hovered nearby, adjusting, her bright sapphire gown and whispering reminders in his ear. "This is going to be the perfect night," Nathaniel muttered to himself, straightening his tie. Everything is under control. He had no idea how fragile that control really was. The doors at the far end of the room opened, and a hush rippled through the crowd. People instinctively turned, heads tilted, phones discreetly raised. And there she was, Evelyn Carter, no longer the invisible, timid ex-wife, no longer the woman Nathaniel had underestimated for 5 long years. She descended the grand staircase like a vision of power and elegance. Her gown was midnight black, sculpted to her frame, with a high slit that revealed a confident stride. Her hair flowed like molten chocolate over her shoulders, perfectly styled. A single diamond bracelet sparkled on her wrist, subtle but unmistakably valuable. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He recognized that bearing, that air of control. His ex-wife, the woman he had dismissed, was commanding the room, not as a guest but as a force to be reckoned with. Evelyn paused at the bottom of the staircase, scanning the crowd. Her eyes locked on Nathaniel, piercing and unflinching. A small, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. She was calm, composed, and deadly in her quiet triumph. James, her longtime advisor and confidant, stepped up beside her. "Remember," he whispered, "patience. Let them see, but not yet touch. Let the power speak first." Nathaniel tried to approach, but the moment felt surreal. Conversations around him paused, glasses froze mid-air. Even Isabella's confident smile faltered. The invisible wife? Not anymore. This woman exuded authority, influence, and undeniable control. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to demand. Her presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the room. A murmur spread. Someone whispered, "That's Evelyn Carter?" Another guest said, "She owns Sterling Dynamics stock." And then, like dominoes, the realization struck. The ex-wife, Nathaniel thought, powerless, was now one of the most influential figures in the company. Nathaniel tried to regain composure, masking his disbelief with a practiced smile. "Evelyn," he said, stepping toward her, "this is unexpected." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "Not unexpected," she replied smoothly. "Just overdue." Evelyn turned slightly, allowing the crowd to glimpse the invitation in her hand. "Gentlemen, ladies, tonight's merger discussions will proceed differently than planned. I will be taking an active role in all decisions regarding Sterling Dynamics. Nathaniel, as you can see, I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for results." The murmurs swelled into quiet shock. Nathaniel's confident empire, meticulously built, was now subject to scrutiny by the very woman he had thought powerless. The room shifted, some with curiosity, some with envy, but all recognizing the undeniable fact: the invisible wife was gone. Evelyn's phone buzzed briefly. She glanced down and nodded ever so slightly at James. The first wave of change had begun. Deals would be reconsidered, alliances questioned, and Nathaniel's carefully curated control threatened. And for the first time in 5 years, Nathaniel Sterling felt something unfamiliar: fear. The next morning, Sterling Dynamics Chicago headquarters felt different. The usual hum of printers, soft chatter, and ringing phones seemed muted, as though the building itself recognized that something had changed. Employees whispered in corners, glancing nervously at the security team now stationed outside every executive office. Evelyn Carter, once dismissed as a quiet, compliant wife, had arrived early to take control. Nathaniel sat behind his glass-walled corner office, his fingers drumming the mahogany desk. He stared out at the city, trying to summon the confidence he had mastered over decades. But every glance at his inbox reminded him that Evelyn had already initiated contact with every major investor. She had strategically acquired proxy votes overnight, legally binding agreements, and insider endorsements, all while he slept. A soft knock at the door startled him. It was Isabella, looking unusually tense, clutching a tablet. "Sir, it's happening. She's called an emergency board meeting." Nathaniel's throat tightened. An emergency board meeting? Today? His mind raced. He had prepared for quarterly reports, a minor reorganization, nothing like this. How does she have the authority? She has it, sir, Isabella admitted, her voice trembling slightly. All of it, legally. Her trust controls 42% of the voting shares. If she sides with the remaining minority stakeholders, she could outvote you on any decisions starting today. Nathaniel ran his hands through his hair, a rare show of panic. The woman he had dismissed, the one he had considered harmless, was now holding the cards. And worse, she was smiling. Meanwhile, Evelyn strode into the boardroom, flanked by James and her legal counsel, her presence radiating absolute control. Every chair seemed to invite respect. Every gesture commanded attention. Nathaniel entered moments later, expecting hostility. Instead, he was greeted with a calm precision that cut deeper than any argument. "Good morning, everyone," Evelyn began, her voice steady, almost melodic. "We have some structural changes to implement immediately. We'll start with asset management, proceed to investor relations, and review all merger discussions. Nathaniel, I'm sure you'll find these adjustments enlightening." Nathaniel swallowed hard, trying to hide his anger behind a mask of professionalism. "Evelyn, these changes, don't you think it's abrupt?" The board, Evelyn interrupted smoothly, "is here to serve the company, not individual egos. And as the controlling shareholder through the Roth Trust, I am responsible for the company's future. You taught me that, Nathaniel. I learned from the best. But mistakes cannot continue under my watch." A tense silence followed. Nathaniel's mind reeled. He had spent years cultivating his empire, yet the woman he had once dismissed as naive was now orchestrating every move with precision. Evelyn's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and nodded toward James. "The first round of proxy votes has been verified. Decisions that were previously stalled are now approved. We will move forward with restructuring immediately." Nathaniel's chest tightened. His empire wasn't crumbling, it was being rewritten, and every move she made was deliberate, calculated, a reminder that he had underestimated her intelligence, resilience, and foresight. Then, with a calm, almost casual gesture, Evelyn turned to Nathaniel and said, "Don't worry, Nathaniel. I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to make sure the company, and everyone who depends on it, survives. That includes you. But understand this, I will not be invisible anymore. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not to you." The words sank in, heavy with meaning. Nathaniel realized with a pang of both fear and admiration that Evelyn Carter had transformed overnight from a quiet, overlooked wife into a formidable force, someone capable of toppling his control without ever raising her voice. For the first time in his life, Nathaniel felt truly challenged, not by a competitor, but by the woman he had once thought powerless. By midday, the entire financial district of Chicago seemed to buzz with rumors. Emails flew faster than employees could read them. Investors who had long ignored Evelyn's existence were suddenly scrambling, calling their brokers, checking their holdings, and revising projections. Nathaniel watched in disbelief from his office window as the empire he had built began bending, not breaking but bending, to the will of the woman he had underestimated. Evelyn's presence was everywhere. She moved through the boardroom like a seasoned general, her decisions decisive, her tone calm, yet unyielding. She initiated audits, reshuffled executive roles, and reviewed contracts with a meticulous eye that Nathaniel hadn't realized she possessed. Every move was precise, every word calculated, every glance a subtle reminder of her new authority. James, her chief strategist, leaned close as she reviewed a portfolio on her tablet. "Are you sure about the Connolly acquisition?" he whispered. Evelyn's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Absolutely. It's undervalued, poorly managed, and misaligned with Nathaniel's vision. He would have let it crumble." "I won't." Meanwhile, Nathaniel was trying to rally his allies. He convened his senior team, expecting loyalty, expecting fear to keep him in control. But the subtle shift in the room told him otherwise. Executives who had once followed blindly now hesitated, aware that Evelyn had leverage, control of votes, influence over investors, and the trust of key stakeholders. "You need to see the numbers," Nathaniel barked, slamming his hand on the conference table. "We cannot let her dictate terms." An older executive, Martin Hale, leaned back and said cautiously, "Sir, with all due respect, she already has dictated terms, and some of them make sense." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Sense. That word, spoken in the presence of his own staff, was an insult. Evelyn wasn't reckless, she wasn't emotional, she was strategic. And strategy, Nathaniel realized bitterly, was the very skill he had prided himself on teaching her. By late afternoon, Evelyn had called a private session with key department heads. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," she said softly, yet with authority that made all ears prick up. "We're here to ensure Sterling Dynamics survives and thrives. I need your trust, your cooperation, and your honesty. No more half measures, no more shortcuts, no more hidden agendas. If we succeed, everyone benefits. If we fail, we all fail." There was a pause. Some nodded, others swallowed hard. Nathaniel, watching from his office, felt the ground shift beneath him. For the first time, he understood that Evelyn's power wasn't derived from confrontation or theatrics. It came from clarity, foresight, and the ability to command respect without demanding it. As the evening approached, a subtle tension began to weave through the city. News of Evelyn's takeover had leaked, sparking speculation among market analysts. Stocks fluctuated, investors murmured, and Nathaniel's confidence cracked with every passing hour. Evelyn, however, remained composed. She looked out at the city skyline from the boardroom, her reflection framed by the setting sun. For years she had been invisible. For years she had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed. But now she was no longer silent, and her silence had been the weapon that Nathaniel never saw coming. And somewhere deep inside, Nathaniel realized something he hadn't admitted before. He had underestimated her heart, her patience, and her resolve. Evelyn Carter, or as he once knew her, the quiet, compliant wife, was no longer anyone he could control. She was her own storm. The next morning, Chicago's Sterling Dynamics headquarters felt different. Even the elevators seemed to hum with anticipation. Employees whispered in hallways, security was tighter, and the air carried a charge of uncertainty. Evelyn arrived with her usual calm, her tailored navy suit a sharp contrast to the chaotic energy around her. She had scheduled an emergency board meeting. Every director, every senior executive, every key investor representative was summoned. Nathaniel, storming in last, expected to dominate the room with his signature arrogance. Instead, he found the seats taken by confident faces that no longer feared him. Evelyn opened the meeting with a simple line, "Let's stop pretending we all have the same goal. We don't. Some of you work for profits, some work for prestige, some work for ego. I work for results, and if anyone here cannot deliver, I will replace you." A murmur ran through the room. Nathaniel's face flushed. "Excuse me," he said, trying to assert control. "You're my ex-wife. You have no right." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. She held up her hand. "Nathaniel, you taught me that fear and intimidation win loyalty only temporarily. I intend to lead differently. You taught me patience. I intend to use it to build a future you will never touch." The room went silent. Investors leaned forward, watching the power dynamics shift. Directors shifted in their chairs, realizing that Evelyn's authority was no longer just symbolic. She controlled votes, assets, and alliances that Nathaniel had taken for granted. James leaned over to Evelyn. "Do you want me to start with the acquisition plan?" "Yes," she said, "and make it clear. Every number, every forecast, every projection must be independently verified. No exaggerations, no assumptions. We play this game with facts, not pride. Nathaniel felt a pang of panic. He had always relied on controlling perception, on spinning narratives, on bending numbers. Evelyn didn't need any of that. She wielded truth like a blade. Hours passed in tense deliberation. Evelyn asked questions that exposed incompetence, uncovered hidden liabilities, and revealed opportunities Nathaniel had ignored. Each time she spoke, her confidence grew. Each time Nathaniel tried to interrupt, her calm rebuttals highlighted his desperation. By late afternoon, a decision was made. Evelyn proposed a bold acquisition of a tech company in San Francisco, a risky move that Nathaniel had dismissed months earlier. The board, swayed by her data and foresight, approved unanimously. Nathaniel's protestations fell flat. As the meeting ended, Evelyn gathered her closest advisors. "We've turned the first corner," she said, "but this is only the beginning. He may still try to sabotage us, to spin the media, to create chaos. But remember this: he can't win what he never truly owned." Nathaniel lingered outside the glass walls, watching Evelyn stride through the corridors with purpose. For the first time he felt powerless, like a man who had lost his shadow. He clenched his fists and muttered under his breath, "She's going to ruin me." Evelyn didn't hear him. She was too busy planning her next move, the one that would solidify her authority and ensure that Nathaniel Sterling's empire would survive only because she allowed it. In that moment, she wasn't just the woman he had underestimated. She was the architect of a new era, a force that no one, not even Nathaniel, could ignore. The following morning, Evelyn woke to the hum of Chicago traffic outside her penthouse, but unlike the city below, she felt a strange calm. Today wasn't about deals or numbers. It was about reputation, perception, and finally, the truth. She had called a press briefing, something Nathaniel never expected. The media had long painted her as the quiet, invisible ex-wife, a shadow living in his empire's glow. But today, that illusion would be shattered. The conference room at Sterling Dynamics was filled with journalists, cameras, and microphones. Nathaniel, of course, had been tipped off, arriving in his crisp suit and polished confidence, expecting a simple divorce settlement story. Instead, he was met with an organized, professional, commanding woman. Evelyn stepped to the podium. She removed her sunglasses, letting the lights hit her face, her eyes sharp and unflinching. She took a deep breath. "For years," she began, "I was portrayed as a shadow, a silent wife. But shadows can move, and silence can speak louder than words. I'm Evelyn Hart, not Evelyn Sterling, and the narrative you've seen is incomplete." Nathaniel stiffened, recognizing the threat in her tone. He had never heard her speak like this, with clarity and authority that demanded attention. Evelyn continued, "I walked away from a divorce with nothing, or so it seemed. But sometimes what looks like surrender is the quiet before a storm. In the past year, I've rebuilt, reorganized, and invested strategically. Today, I am proud to announce my role as majority stakeholder in Sterling Dynamics' latest acquisition, a company that Nathaniel dismissed as too small to matter. Yet, in its innovation, it holds the key to our global expansion." Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, his ego flaring with anger he couldn't control. Evelyn didn't stop. "This is not about revenge, nor is it about money. It's about vision, about integrity, about proving that no one, no spouse, no partner, no colleague, can define my worth." As the press asked questions, Evelyn answered calmly, strategically, and without a trace of fear. Each answer built her credibility. Each pause highlighted Nathaniel's impotence. By the end, the narrative had shifted completely. The quiet wife was no longer invisible. She was untouchable. Outside, in the lobby, Nathaniel confronted her. This is ridiculous," he spat. "You're just lucky. You can't control everything. You'll burn out." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Control isn't the goal. Influence is. And luck is just preparation meeting opportunity, Nathaniel." He stared at her, the reality sinking in. The woman he had dismissed, the woman he thought he knew, had become more powerful than he could ever imagine. As he stormed out, Evelyn turned back to the waiting press. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The truth had spoken for her, louder than any publicist or billionaire could. And somewhere deep inside, Nathaniel knew his world had changed forever. Evelyn didn't return to her penthouse that evening. Instead, she walked through the streets of downtown Chicago, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier drizzle. Her mind wasn't on victory, it was on strategy. Winning the public battle was just the first move. The real game was far from over. At a discreet office in the West Loop, her team awaited her. Silas, her former bodyguard turned head of security, briefed her on the last-minute developments. Nathaniel has started making back-channel calls. He's trying to influence the board, delay the acquisition, maybe even sabotage it. Evelyn listened, her calm demeanor masking the storm inside. "Let him try," she said softly. "We've anticipated every possible move. He doesn't know what he's up against." Her personal assistant, Chloe, handed her a tablet. Charts, emails, and financial reports blinked across the screen, everything Nathaniel might exploit. Evelyn's eyes scanned them with a practiced precision, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. She had always been underestimated, and underestimation was a weapon. "Silas," she said, "ensure every communication channel is secure, no leaks. If Nathaniel thinks he can pull a fast one, he's about to realize the difference between fear and foresight." Silas nodded. "Understood, Miss Hart." But there was another concern gnawing at Evelyn, a personal one. The betrayal she felt from the years with Nathaniel had left scars, and some of them were still raw. Love, hope, regret. They weren't gone. They were buried beneath layers of armor and strategy. And tonight, as she watched the city skyline shimmer, she felt the tiniest pulse of uncertainty. Could she truly leave all of that behind? Her phone buzzed. A secure message flashed. "Meet me, midnight, Navy Pier. I have information Nathaniel won't see coming." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Whoever this was, it could change everything. The timing, the secrecy, it wasn't accidental. She responded with a single word. "Confirmed." As she left the office, the wind carried the faint smell of the lake, a reminder that even in the chaos of power and betrayal, some things were constant. And tonight, she would confront the forces pulling at the strings behind Nathaniel's empire, a shadow war that could tip the scales of everything she had built. The night was young, and Evelyn Hart, once invisible, was about to step fully into the light. The Navy Pier was nearly deserted at midnight, the Ferris wheel casting slow, ghostly reflections on Lake Michigan. The air was sharp and cold, tugging at Evelyn's cashmere coat as she walked toward the shadowed corner where her contact had asked her to meet. A figure emerged from behind a pillar, tall, lean, and impossibly calm. His face was partially hidden beneath a hood, but the authority in his stance was unmistakable. Evelyn didn't flinch. She had faced far worse than mystery men in dark alleys. "You're punctual," he said, his voice low and smooth, almost too casual for the gravity in his tone. "I prefer to be on time," Evelyn replied, "especially when dealing with threats I don't fully understand." He handed her a slim envelope. Inside, everything Nathaniel has been hiding from the board, from investors, even from his own lawyers, offshore accounts, shell companies, personal debts, enough to make him crumble if this goes public. Evelyn took it carefully, her mind racing. "How did you get this?" He shrugged. "Let's just say I have access to certain inconvenient truths. I make a habit of correcting imbalances." Her lips curved into a thin, measured smile. "Convenient, just the way I like it." Before she could ask more, he added, almost as an afterthought, "But be careful. Nathaniel isn't stupid. If he suspects you have leverage, he'll act. He won't just fight for money, he'll fight for revenge." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the envelope. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and yet nothing scared her more than underestimating the man who once claimed to love her. "I've learned," she said, voice steady, "and I never underestimate." The figure nodded once, then melted back into the shadows. Evelyn stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of what she now held in her hands. It wasn't just a weapon, it was proof. Proof that the invisible wife was no longer invisible, and the man who had once controlled her life was about to feel the full force of her reckoning. The city lights glittered off the water, reflecting the storm building in her mind. By sunrise, she would have her next move in place, and Nathaniel Sterling wouldn't know what hit him. Evelyn turned back toward the car, her resolve crystallizing. No more games, no more waiting. This time, she would control the board, the deal, and the narrative. By 8:30 a.m., the glass towers of downtown Chicago gleamed like polished knives under the winter sun. Evelyn walked through the revolving doors of Sterling Enterprises headquarters, calm and composed. Inside, the familiar scent of leather, coffee, and expensive cologne greeted her, a reminder of the life she had once been forced to navigate silently. Nathaniel Sterling, seated at the head of the boardroom table, looked every bit the titan he always wanted to appear. His tailored navy suit and gold cufflinks reflected authority, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, subtle, almost imperceptible. He didn't see Evelyn enter. She was no longer the woman who flinched under his gaze. She was the storm he hadn't anticipated, invisible. "Morning," she said, her voice slicing through the murmur of executives gathering for the quarterly briefing. Every head turned. Murmurs filled the room like electricity. Nathaniel finally looked up, his brow furrowing. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" "Taking my rightful seat," she replied, placing the envelope on the polished table. "And I think you'll want to see this before anyone else does." The room went silent. She tapped the envelope lightly. Offshore accounts, fake partnerships, hidden debts, contracts signed without board approval, and perhaps most interestingly, she paused, locking eyes with Nathaniel. "Your plan to sell half the company to a competitor without informing your shareholders." A sharp gasp came from the CFO. Nathaniel's face went pale. How did you get this?" Evelyn smiled faintly, almost bitterly. "Does it matter? What matters is what I do with it now." The executives shifted in their seats, the tension thick enough to taste. Nathaniel slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous. You have no authority here." "Not yet," Evelyn said. "But by the end of this meeting, that will change. And if you think I'm bluffing—" She opened the envelope, letting a few documents slide across the table. "You're going to realize just how vulnerable your empire is without me." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He had always believed money equaled control. But Evelyn had learned another lesson over the last 5 years. Knowledge is power, and revenge is sweetest when it's inevitable. The room held its breath. For the first time in years, Nathaniel Sterling felt the icy taste of fear, and Evelyn, once invisible, now held all the cards. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Executives exchanged nervous glances, their loyalties wavering as Evelyn's revelations sank in. Nathaniel's usual composure was cracking, and for the first time, he realized the woman he had underestimated could dismantle everything he had built. Before he could speak, the door opened, and a tall man in a charcoal suit stepped in. His presence carried authority, yet there was a hint of mischief in his sharp blue eyes. "I see I'm not too late," he said smoothly. Evelyn's eyes lit up. "Miles, perfect timing." Nathaniel stiffened. "And who exactly is this?" Miles walked confidently to the center of the room, scanning the documents on the table. "Someone who's been quietly tracking all of Nathaniel's creative accounting. Someone who can make sure these numbers see the light of day." Evelyn smiled, the corners of her mouth curling with satisfaction. "Nathaniel, meet my ally. He's going to make sure the board understands exactly what's been happening behind closed doors." Nathaniel's face turned red with anger. This is a setup. You can't—" "Watch me," Evelyn interrupted. "And let me remind everyone here," she said, gesturing to the board members, that while Nathaniel controlled the headlines, he never controlled the truth. And today, the truth has a voice. Miles tapped his tablet, and a projection lit up the wall, spreadsheets, emails, contracts, and bank statements, all pointing to hidden transactions and mismanaged funds. The boardroom erupted into murmurs and shocked gasps. Nathaniel tried to regain control. "This is slander, fabrications." Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes cold steel. "Everything here is verifiable, and if you think a lawsuit will silence me, think again. Because while I may have been quiet, I've spent years learning exactly how to play this game. And now I'm not just playing, I'm winning." A hand rose from the back of the room. The CFO spoke cautiously. "Nathaniel, this is serious. If these documents are legitimate, the board will have to act immediately." Nathaniel slammed his fist on the table. but Evelyn ignored him. She turned to Miles. "Release the rest. Full transparency. Let them see everything." The projector expanded, revealing a cascade of evidence that left no corner of Nathaniel's empire untouched. The room fell into stunned silence. Nathaniel's empire, the one he had built through manipulation and fear, was crumbling in real time. Evelyn stood tall, the woman who had once been invisible now the center of attention, her presence commanding respect, awe, and fear. She was no longer the quiet housewife. She was a force, and the game had just changed. Nathaniel sat frozen in his chair, his hands trembling. The room that had always bent to his will was now an arena where he had no control. The board members whispered urgently, their eyes darting between him and Evelyn. The weight of decades of lies pressed down on him like a physical force. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking on the polished floor. "Do you realize, Nathaniel, how fragile your world was?" she asked, her voice low but cutting. "All the power, the money, the respect, how quickly it disappears when someone sees the truth." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "You think this changes anything? You're just one woman. Just one woman." Evelyn's laugh was sharp, echoing in the room. "Nathaniel, I've been underestimated my whole life, and now I have allies you can't even imagine. Miles here, the board, and everyone who ever believed you were untouchable. You're not untouchable anymore." Miles stepped forward, holding a folder filled with additional documents. "And it doesn't stop here. Nathaniel, these files are being shared with regulators, journalists, and key investors. By tomorrow morning, your empire will be in pieces if you don't act, legally, ethically, or otherwise. The choice is yours." Nathaniel's face turned ashen. For the first time, he felt the panic he had always inspired in others. You can't do this. You don't understand what's at stake." Evelyn's gaze softened ever so slightly, just enough to show that she had never wanted vengeance for its own sake. "I understand very clearly. What's at stake is fairness, respect, truth, and I've spent too long invisible to let someone like you decide what my life is worth." A quiet tension settled over the room as the board members shifted, the scales of power tipping visibly toward Evelyn. The once invincible Nathaniel Sterling was now isolated, exposed, and vulnerable. Evelyn turned her attention back to him fully. "This is your last chance, Nathaniel. You can either step aside and accept the consequences, or you can fight and watch everything you've built collapse." Nathaniel's hands clenched into fists. For a moment the room held its breath. Then, slowly he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. He knew the fight was over. Evelyn's smile was calm, almost serene. She had walked away from marriage, from lies, and from the person who tried to define her. Now she was standing in her own power, unshakable, unafraid, and unstoppable. Outside, the city of Chicago shimmered under the winter sun. Inside the boardroom, a new era was beginning, one led not by fear or greed, but by a woman who had learned to be seen and who refused to be invisible ever again. Evelyn stepped out onto the rooftop terrace of the Sterling Tower, the city lights of Chicago sparkling beneath her like a sea of possibilities. The wind tugged at her coat, carrying away years of doubt, fear, and the shadow of a life she had never fully lived. For the first time in her life, she felt free, not just free from Nathaniel, but free from the invisible chains she had carried within herself. The phone in her hand buzzed. It was Miles. "The media is alive with the story," he said. "The board has officially accepted your leadership. Nathaniel is stepping down immediately. All assets are being frozen until the investigations are complete. You've done it." Evelyn allowed herself a small, victorious smile. "We've done it," she corrected. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice, and finally claiming what I've earned, in every sense." Her gaze shifted to the horizon. She had plans, real ones. Foundations to rebuild, businesses to grow ethically, people to protect, and a future that no one could define for her. The Roth name would no longer be whispered behind closed doors as a secret. It would be spoken with respect, admiration, and awe. Back in the now empty boardroom, Nathaniel Sterling sat alone, staring at his reflection in the glass. The man who had once thought he owned the world realized, too late, that control was an illusion. All the money, all the power, all the influence, it was meaningless when trust, respect, and integrity were absent. For the first time, he understood what he had lost, and the price was absolute. Evelyn didn't linger on him. She had no need for closure. Her life was forward-looking. She stepped into her car, the black interior warm against the winter chill, and looked out at the city she had always loved but never truly claimed. Tonight she would attend a gala, but tomorrow she would start a new venture. A company, yes, but more importantly, a legacy. One built on intelligence, strength, and courage, not on fear or submission. As the city's lights reflected in the car window, Evelyn whispered to herself. A soft promise carried on the wind. I am no longer invisible. I am the storm. And with that, the engine purred, the city stretched endlessly before her, and Evelyn Roth, the woman who had quietly walked away from everything and returned stronger than anyone imagined, drove into her future. The invisible wife had vanished. The woman who could not be ignored had arrived. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more